Good afternoon or good morning, and welcome to our webinar, Driving Sustainability Solutions, a conversation with women leading the climate response. We are going to get started in about 20 seconds as we let more people in. So hang tight, we'll be with you in just a moment. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you everyone for joining us. Again, this is the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions webinar co-hosted with JPMorgan and Chase, Driving Sustainability Solutions, a conversation with women leading the climate response. I'm Verena Radulovich, and I'm going to be your host. I'm the Director of Corporate Engagement at the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, and welcome to this webinar held during a very busy Climate Week. For those of you who may not be as familiar with our work, C2ES is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research organization, and we're committed to advancing climate solutions and the technologies and policies that promote them. We catalyze business action through our growing Business Environmental Leadership Council, which is a group of Fortune 500 companies that are committed to addressing climate change. And we do this by bringing stakeholders together of different perspectives and different sectors, and we seek to build common ground. So today, with C2ES, we have our co-hosts with JPMorgan Chase & Company, and we're grateful to have you along for our conversation with women leaders in corporate sustainability. We're going to talk about the successes and challenges that their companies face as they work to decarbonize their operations, to create products that enable us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and to work to lower the carbon footprints across their value chains. We're also going to explore what leadership qualities are necessary to help companies shift into and thrive in a decarbonized future, and observations on how the climate, energy, and sustainability professions are evolving and how it can continue to evolve to engender greater diversity. So a couple of housekeeping items before we go ahead and get started. We do intend to take questions from the audience and contribute to the conversation, but that's after we've had a moderated discussion. So to submit a question, please open the questions tab on your control panel and submit them there, and we're going to be monitoring them as they come in. And then after we have a moderated discussion with the panelists, I will go ahead and ask some of the questions that come in. Another housekeeping item is that we have had a record number of people sign up. We've had 1,700 people sign up, which to me means that this is an issue, not only the topic of how companies are reducing emissions, but I really think the understanding of what are the leadership qualities and how can women be driving the climate response is a topic that people really care about. So we're very excited to get into it. But as a result of that, if you are, we are going to have to cap the number of attendees at 500. And so if you are going to step away from your computer for a moment, please don't sign out because otherwise you'll lose your spot. If you need to leave before the end of the webinar, please close the application completely because that will allow somebody else in the waiting room to take your spot. If you do miss this, the webinar is being recorded in full, and the recording will be posted on the C2ES YouTube page within 24 hours. So today's Thursday, the 24th of September. It'll be available soon. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our really impressive panel today. We are really lucky to feature 4 women who are all leading in different ways on climate, and they're driving change within their companies. And each of these companies represent different sectors. So first up, I'll introduce all of them, and then we'll go ahead and dive into kind of the first batch of questions. We are joined by Marisa Buchanan, who's head of sustainability at JPMorgan Chase & Company. We have Ezgi Barcenas, Global Vice President of Sustainability at Anheuser-Busch Inbev. Raminta Jautokas, Corporate Sustainability Manager at American Honda Motor Company Incorporated. And on the phone with us today, we have Michelle Patron, Director of Sustainability Policy at Microsoft. So let's go ahead and get started. For this first set of discussion questions, I'd like each of the companies to talk about how they are addressing climate change so that the audience can get a sense of how each of their companies are uniquely addressing this challenge. And Marisa, I'm going to start with you. And if you can talk about, how JPMorgan Chase is approaching reducing its emissions, if there are any specific initiatives or policies that you want to highlight as part of that. So I turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks, Marina, and hi everyone. It's really nice to be with you today. Always fun during Climate Week together, and it's especially nice to have a panel full of women, so thank you. Sustainability and climate has really been a journey for us at JPMorgan. I liken it to a marathon, not a sprint. And I would say we're maybe somewhere along the quarter-mile mark right now for the marathon. Still, a long way to go, but a lot has been accomplished. And there's a lot more that we can do. So that's what we're really focused on. The journey for us, I think, really started, about 10 years ago. The focus was really on our operations. And since then, it's really expanded to how we think about the impact that we're having through our business and financing activities. And a big part of that is thinking about how we manage climate-related risk when it comes to doing business with certain industries and clients. But I think, even more importantly, it's about how do we work really productively with our clients to support them in managing climate-related issues and really thinking about a low-carbon transition. So earlier this year, we came out with a series of new sustainability commitments, which really expand upon what we have been doing over the past several years. So those new commitments were really anchored by a few key things. One was a commitment to facilitate $200 billion in financing for companies that are advancing some core objectives of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and climate is the key piece of that. We're a big financier of renewable energy through our tax equity business. We're one of the largest underwriters of green bonds in the market, and doing a whole lot more to think through how we can advance climate action and sustainability by, really advancing this from a financing perspective. We also announced some new financing restrictions for coal mining and coal-fired power. And we announced that we were joining a group called the Climate Leadership Council. I know some of my other panelists are also involved in that group, and others really advocating for climate policy solutions. We feel strongly that, businesses like ours have a big role to play, but it's really important that we have strong long-term policy signals, including a price on carbon, to really drive much more consistent action. And I think importantly, send the important pricing signals to the market so that you can unlock the kind of long-term financing that you need in order to really tackle these challenges. Lastly, I'll just say quickly, we're also focused on what we can do operationally. We have been offsetting 100% of carbon emissions from employee travel over the past few years. And we also announced a few years ago that we're working towards a 100% renewable energy commitment for all of our power consumed across our buildings, branches, and data centers. And I'm really excited that our colleagues in our global real estate group are really leading with deploying things like on-site solar systems. We have a huge campus in Columbus, Ohio, which is called Polaris, and we currently have what's now the second largest solar panel installation there at a commercial office building. So lots of exciting work and more underway that we look forward to sharing in the near future.
Thank you very much, Marisa. All right, next up, we're going to hear from Ezgi Barcenas from Anheuser-Busch Inbev. And again, if you can talk about how your company is approaching climate change, or what your goals or future emissions reductions opportunities are, anything you want to highlight, and you can speak to the role of policy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Verena and Marisa for co-hosting this session and for inviting me as well. So for those of you that may not know Anheuser-Busch InBev, we are the leading brewer with operations across nearly 50 countries around the world, and we'd like to think that we're a very global local company. And in support of the transition to a low carbon economy, a couple of years ago, we came out with our current public commitments, which are our 2025 sustainability goals. One of those is our commitment to reduce our carbon emissions across our entire value chain by 25%. This is a science-based target that puts us in line with the 1.5 degree pathway. And we're really proud of this because this allows us to tackle our scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions. In addition to that, or within that, I should say, we also have a 100% renewable electricity commitment by 2025. So all these are really allowing us to think about the future and to continue to champion new innovations and disruptive technologies in the market. And maybe on the flip side, what I should also highlight here is how we're working with our agricultural supply chains to continue to improve their climate resilience as well. We're working with some of the world's most vulnerable communities in our smallholder farming supply chains, and across Africa, India, Middle America, South America, and for us, working side by side with them, continuing to provide them with the right seed varieties, the right tools, the right crop management protocols is extremely important to ensure that we're improving their climate response, their climate resilience. If I can give one example, Marisa gave a policy example, maybe I'll give it more of an initiative example. So sustainability sits within our procurement organization inside the company, and this really gives us a very unique ability and opportunity to collaborate with our supply chain, with our suppliers, through our category teams. And these are incredibly collaborative discussions. And a couple years ago, late 2018, we developed our Eclipse Platform. This is a sustainability dedicated collaboration platform for our huge network of suppliers and partners. And the idea there is to facilitate a shared vision, shared goals, to start thinking about target setting or maybe standardizing, ways of measurement and sharing best practices amongst our supplier base. And we're really proud of the engagement that we've received from some of our largest suppliers. To date, we've got over 50 suppliers that have joined the platform across raw materials, packaging, technology, and they are working hard with us to tackle some of the world's largest problems. And this is a first of its kind in the beverage industry. We're really excited to also offer some of the educational webinars and workshops as part of this platform with sector experts across so many industries. So again, a great way to learn about new ways of partnering with our supply chain and to tackle shared problems together.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to turn to Raminta, and Honda makes cars that we all drive in. So whereas we just finished drinking beer, we're not going to get in the car right after we drink beer. But if you can talk about some of the work that you've seen at Honda, you've been at Honda for a long time, and how the company has evolved, where it's going, and some initiatives that you'd like to highlight.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. Honda's main goal is that we're voluntarily reducing our emissions, our all total global emissions, 50% by 2050 from 2000 levels. The biggest challenge for us is product in use. 80% of our emissions is our scope 3 product in use emissions. So we've made a commitment to electrify 2/3 of Honda's global automobile sales by 2030 with a combination of hybrids, EVs, and fuel cell vehicles. And in terms of corporate, we have actually signed the PPAs to use renewable energy. And as soon as those come online, which is very soon, we will be providing 60% of electricity to our factories with renewable energy. So that's pretty exciting. If I really look back at the projects that I feel are the most impactful, and I think in the direction that we should head, is something like our Green Dealer program, which what we did, and from the very beginning when we were designing that program, we had in mind that we wanted to release the entire program and the entire guide to the dealer community, not just Honda dealerships. And we did that, and I'm quite proud that we did that. We did the same with Honda Smart Home. We built a smart home and we publish all the findings that we have on websites. And then most recently, we did a cross-industry collaboration. So we led a formation of the Vehicle Grid Integration Council. So that's an industry advocacy group, and it's focused on creating a positive business environment for electric vehicles and smart EV charging, which is basically charging and discharging the EV vehicle and to help stabilize and make a reliable grid and a cleaner grid. So that's pretty exciting. We have a lot of other companies that have joined, including other automakers. And I just feel strongly that this in the future is really where we need to go, to do collaborative work among similar industries, and cross-industry. We could compete on certain things, but we should never compete on environmental issues because we no longer have luxury to go at it alone. I think that we need to unite and amplify our efforts, and I think we'll all be stronger for that.
All right, thank you. And we'll then transition to Michelle, Michelle Patron on the phone from Microsoft. And Michelle, if you can talk, I mean, Microsoft's gotten a lot of press with its carbon negative goal, as well as some of the work that it's done on renewables. if you can talk about kind of a little bit about the journey that Microsoft's been on, where it's going, and any project you want to highlight, and also if there is the role of policy, since I know Microsoft is active there.
Well, thank you, Verena, and it really is a pleasure to join this tremendous panel. Thank you, C2ES and JPMorgan Chase for hosting it and for inviting me. You know, for Microsoft, climate is one of the most urgent issues of our time, and what the science is telling us is that we need to do more and we need to do it faster. Microsoft has been hard at work at this for over the last decade, but those who can do more must, and that's why earlier this year in January we set this new goal to be carbon negative across our operations and our supply chain by 2030, and to keep going until we remove all the carbon that Microsoft has put into the atmosphere since we were founded as a company in the 1970s, and to do that by 2050. And that's going to require us to be 100% renewable by 2025, to electrify our fleet, to significantly reduce the embodied carbon that goes into our buildings and the new campuses that we're building. In addition, we've committed $1 billion in new capital to deploy to Climate Innovation Fund in technologies to help get them from the lab to the market. And we have had for a while an internal carbon tax that we've applied to our own operations and our travel, and we're expanding that to cover our supply chain as well. We also recognize that it's not just about carbon for climate, and ecosystems and waste and water are also part of the problem and part of the solution. And so in April, we announced that we're going to protect as much land as we use, and that our ambition to build a planetary computer by 2030 to really help the world, help our customers and our partners monitor and manage natural resources. In August, we announced that we're going to be net zero waste, and just this week we announced that we are going to be water positive for our operations by 2030 and replenish more than we consume around the world. And because we know that water is the first and worst impact. It's not just about what we're going to do in our commitments, it's also really where we see the most opportunity is with working with our customers and our partners to develop the technology to help them achieve their goals in all of this space. One of the areas that I'm particularly excited about is the work that Microsoft does on policy, and really not just taking positive policy stances, but actively engaging. And Marisa mentioned carbon pricing, and we're thrilled to be partnered with JPMorgan, Chase on CLC, and other companies. And we came out publicly in 2018 on carbon pricing. We supported the Washington State Ballot Initiative. We supported the expansion of the RGGI regional market, in addition to having a stance on federal carbon policy. We've also actively engaged in the first corporate lobby day in Washington, D.C. in over 10 years, and joining over 100 companies to do that. And we just think the corporate voice is so critical to galvanizing political support for the policy actions that we need, because there's only so much that all companies can do by ourselves.
All right, thank you very much. So what I'd like to do now is kind of segue into the second part of our conversation. And what we've heard, from our panelists, we've heard the one through line that I hear from all four companies is the use of renewable energy, and the use of renewable energy for buildings, an interest in electrifying fleets, an interest in financing the low carbon transition. So there's a kind of common elements. And what I think is really interesting here is that spans a variety of sectors. What I'd like to talk about and have you all talk about are the challenges and the opportunities in meeting your climate ambition. And I think the reason I pull on renewable energy is because that has been an area where we've seen those markets really be mature, and where purchasing renewables actually can be a cost-effective way to even, to purchase your energy. So it happens to be clean, it happens to be cost-effective, which is great. And yet, some of the challenges for deep decarbonization lie in approaches and technologies and consumer behavior changes that have yet to happen. I'm wondering if each of you can talk about the specific challenges and opportunities for your company, and then what you've seen in terms of what leadership qualities are needed. And I flag leadership qualities. I know that those listening in today, this is kind of the sort of the implementation and management side of things, because there's what comes out in the news in terms of what companies are doing. But for those of us that work with companies and in companies, we know that there's an enormous amount of work that happens internally. So I'd like if you can talk about the challenges and opportunities specific to your company, and then what are sort of the lessons learned or the leadership qualities that you see are needed. And I think this time I'm going to shake the order up around a bit. We're going to start with Ezgi and then Raminta, and then we'll do Michelle and end with Marisa on that one. So
Yeah,
Ezgi,
absolutely.
you go first.
So I think the biggest challenge and opportunity I see is that how we're going to make the transition at scale and at pace. And I think this is something that Michelle touched on a couple of times as well. And for me, it is about reaching that scale, providing the reasons to believe that we can reach this scale. And that means that we need to champion new technologies, disruptive technologies. We need to find new ways of working. We need to ensure that there are enabling policies and regulatory frameworks in place to create and operationalize those competitive marketplaces. Again, this is something else that Michelle mentioned as well. And, especially as I'm thinking of renewables, this is exactly what's needed. As part of our 100% renewable electricity commitment, we're looking forward to changing grid structures, bringing additional capacities to markets where we operate. Instead of just directly going into investing in existing assets, we really do want to play a key role, especially in those developing markets, in being, one of the biggest companies that brings that renewable capacity to a new market, or to be there from the beginning as we're looking into identifying, what are the policies that are needed to ensure that marketplace can exist. So I think for me, that's the biggest opportunity and challenge that we have, continuing to take the learnings from markets to market, scale, and maintain that momentum. If I think about the leadership qualities, the first word that comes to mind, I think, is resilience. It's really about being an impactful leader, even when the path forward is uncertain or complex or just difficult. And you need to do that. And for you to remain resilient at all times and drive forward, I think you need to remain curious and bold. And that means that you need to constantly be active listeners, be anchored in your strategic perspective, so that you can keep your eye on the horizon at all times, despite the distractions that come your way or the short-term challenges that come your way. I think it's that fine balance between, how do we continue to deliver the short-term results, but also ensure that long-term resilience.
Okay, thank you. Raminta, what do you think? Oh, Raminta, you're on mute.
The ever challenge of talking on mute. So for us, the biggest thing for us is really, how do you transition to zero emission vehicles and stay profitable? Clearly, everybody wants to go there, but how do you do that and not go out of business? And also, when will consumers prefer? When will they shift to electric vehicles as really the vehicle that they want to drive? So those are the two issues we always have to look at. From opportunities, I'm really proud of what corporations have done with renewable energy. I think all of us on this team are driving that. I think there's a lot of renewable energy coming on the grid because of corporations. So I think that's a really great opportunity to do even more of that, again, with Scope 3, with suppliers, for us with dealers, and logistics. How do you do logistics? How do you reduce that? And then how do you use less raw materials and move towards a circular economy is always on our mind. And I mentioned it briefly before, but in terms of opportunities, I think EVs can really present a great opportunity to work with the grid and to do vehicle to grid interchange with the grid. When the car's not in use and sitting in the parking lot, utilities could use that to stabilize the grid, and the consumer could actually get paid for that. I think it's a really win-win proposition that we're heading towards. Leadership qualities, I will just add to the leadership qualities because I agree with everything Ezgi has said. I think I can think of 3 additional ones. I think that you need to be both a scientist and a salesperson, which is not admittedly a complementary role. But I think you need to understand a certain technical level when you're working on this, and not be afraid to understand that technical level if that's not your field. You don't need the details, you don't need to have a PhD, but just to really get the concept, because you have to evaluate these different options and come up with the solutions. And you have to be a salesperson because it's your responsibility to sell sustainability across the whole company. We all cross every single department in our companies, and you need to be able to do that. And that's followed by networking inside and outside the company. That's really the second quality, I think, because sustainability affects, as I said, almost every part of the company, and you have to have a good internal network that you trust and that trusts you, and that you can get information from and incorporate what you need and what needs to be done. External networks are clearly important for what we're doing right here, for collaboration, lessons learned, for new solutions, and just general support. I think another one is really the ability to see the big picture. You need to really, where are you going? What is your end goal? You need to envision that end goal, even though it seems impossible right now and difficult and lots of obstacles. So you really need to take a look at that, take a step backwards and figure out how to get there. It's pretty easy to get lost in the weeds in this field. So really important to get out of those weeds and really, really understand where you're going and just keep driving towards that.
All right, thank you. So then I'll turn to Michelle and Marisa. Again, the question is, what are the specific challenges and opportunities that your company faces kind of going forward to move to a decarbonized future? And then kind of given your experience, both personally, whether it's at the company you're at now, but maybe even at the company that you're at now, what would be some leadership qualities that are necessary to help get there? And so Michelle.
Sabrina, sure. So if you think about it, you started by talking about renewable energy, and we've seen, or clean energy, or zero carbon energy. And why have we seen such a huge uptake, both in targets, but also in actual progress? And part of that is we understand the problem, right? We need to green our electricity. We understand how much we use. We understand what the carbon content of that is. There are solutions that are available. They might not be exactly what everyone needs, but they are available now. And they've increasingly become cost effective. And as a result, you've been able to build a really, really broad coalition of supporters for it, both within a company and outside of a company, with policymakers, with stakeholders, really right to left. And then if you think about, at least for Microsoft, but also for I think all of the companies on here, we've talked about our supply chain and our value chain, as we really try and scale up our action, we don't actually really even know what the problem is. We know the problem is that our suppliers use a lot of, emit a lot of emissions, but what exactly do they emit, and where do they emit it, and how do they emit it? It's getting a better understanding of that. And some of these are from those really stickier sectors. So building those technologies, those new technologies, those disruptive technologies, as Ezgi said, is critical, and it is both a challenge and opportunity for us. And then going along with it, building that internal buy-in and the external buy-in and the coalition to be able to accomplish both of those. In terms of the leadership skills, I mean, I think that both Raminta and Ezgi both mentioned this and touched upon the top ones. I mean, talking about the scientist salesperson, that was brilliant. You have to be able to operate in extremely matrixed organizations and understand all of the different disciplines and navigate and actually lead those to a common goal, but also all the different sectors outside of your company. And so really navigating those types of matrices and those types of silos is critical. Looking at all the angles, love that about being bold. Growth mindset is what we talk about a lot about Microsoft, not having a fixed solution or fixed strategy, and always kind of rethinking where you're going and how you're going to get there. From an individual leadership perspective, you need to mobilize and lead teams that are really outside your direct chain of command. So how do you galvanize everyone to act in a way that doesn't necessarily accrue to your organization? And in terms of working with companies, there's not really a one size fits all. All of our companies are different. We all have very different emissions profiles. We all have very different businesses. Some of us work directly with customers. Some of us work directly with businesses. Some of us are service oriented. For some companies, it's going to be easier to hit their goals because so much of their energy emissions come from electricity. Others, it's non-electricity. So really just understanding what the business you're working with is and leveraging the unique market position and lever of that business.
All right, thank you. And Marisa, what are your thoughts on this in terms of the specific challenges that JPMorgan or maybe the banking sector faces going forward, and what you've seen is very helpful to have in terms of a skill set to be able to enact change within a very large organization like JPMorgan Chase?
Yeah, thanks, Verena. I think Ezgi and Raminta and Michelle hit on some really, really important points. I would really underscore one thing and then add another. I think you know, building on what they've said, I would just underscore, I think the technology challenge is really big. You know, renewable energy, you know, there's been awesome advancements in renewable energy growth, penetration, decreases in costs. It is commercially available, and it's really penetrating the electric power sector. I think the big challenge is going to be, how do we tackle reductions from other applications and industries where we don't have commercially available solutions today at scale. I think that, you know, this is where you sort of start to get into, what do all the sort of more unsexy sort of solutions look like? You know, we've got to figure out ways to tackle heavy industry and manufacturing and things of that nature. So I think a ton of opportunity there, and a lot of opportunity for policy. You know, the second thing I would just say is we think about the need to transition. It's important to recognize that not everybody is going to come out a winner. And in my view, climate change and the transition is really only going to be successful if we find a way to make it work for people and communities. And acknowledging places where not everybody is going to benefit equally, like, how do we bridge those gaps, whether it's addressing issues around workforce, the fact that we have, you know, communities that are really dependent upon, you know, things like oil and gas today. That's important to recognize and make sure that we find a way to, you know, make them part of the conversation and bring them along as we think about moving forward. As far as, you know, leadership, I really think of myself and, you know, many of my colleagues in JPMorgan as change agents. That's fundamentally who we are. And, you know, I think to be an effective change agent in a large company, it requires really thinking through how to make change, but to do it in how to do it in a commercial way. Because fundamentally, we do work for companies, and we have to be mindful of, you know, sort of Raminta, you know, spoke about, you know, how do you increase penetration of, you know, zero and low carbon, you know, vehicles, but make a profit? I think that's what we're all after at the end of the day. So I think doing that, for me, you know, two things I always keep in mind as I do my work is really understanding, one, what drives people, and then also how decisions made get made within organizations. I think figuring out how to tap into that is really key to think about how to be effective change agents in large organizations.
All right. Before I segue into our third questions, we do have a number of really good questions coming in from the audience, so I want to make sure we have time for that. Is there anything that that any of the panelists want to add or say in terms of kind of the challenges that their companies face, opportunities, or anything to the leadership? If not, I can move on, but I just wanted to pause and see if anyone wanted to add anything.
I just wanted to add with what Marisa was saying with the technology difficulties. From our point of view, the one that's pretty difficult is natural gas. You know, what do we really do in our manufacturing processes with natural gas? So I think that's one of the places where we need some advancement. It would be nice to see it head in the same way as renewable electricity was heading.
Yeah, and you know, for those that are interested, this is a huge area. C2ES, as well as World Wildlife Fund and David Gardner Associates, have an effort called the Renewable Thermal Collaborative, and I know that there are other organizations that are looking at this to try to find ways to create markets for renewable thermal applications, sort of on-site combustion, where you can't necessarily electrify processes. So I know that, and that sort of speaks, Marisa, to your point about how do we really decarbonize industry. So I know this is a shared challenge across the board and throughout supply chains. So I want to move to our third kind of batch of questions before we begin to take audience questions. And this, I think, is, you know, I always think about, and I know that a lot of you have spoken with you on the phone, and for people who have been in sustainability for a long time, what's exciting is that there are a lot of young people in university programs and MBA programs, other graduate programs, where we're starting to see a lot more people wanting to come into this field, which is really great. And that's kind of why I asked the leadership questions. They sort of work your way backwards in terms of the skill sets that are needed to thrive in this field. What have been can you reflect a bit on your experience working on climate throughout the years? You know, where have you seen the sustainability, the climate profession evolve? Where do you think it, and where do you think it can evolve to engender more workforce diversity, the gender diversity, racial diversity, other kinds of diversity. And that's a little bit different, Marisa. I think you touched on the impacts of a kind of a low carbon transition on communities. That is a huge issue, and that's something that I think we can talk about as well. I'm more focused on here, kind of the workforce itself. And so for this one, why don't I start with you, Marisa, and then we'll do Marisa, we'll do Michelle, Raminta, and then Ezgi. Marisa, we'll start with you.
Sure. We're having a lot of conversations internally at JPMorgan about diversity and inclusion. I'm really glad to see this issue getting a lot more attention within the environmental and climate community. It's always been there. There's always been a vibrant environmental justice movement within the environmental field. I don't know that we've done enough to really listen. And I think that is going to be really, a critical challenge for us moving forward. And it is really going to be on us to find a way to, really diversify, not just continue to diversify the movement, but also to really listen and think about the impact that we have and the impact that we have on different communities and people. And a big part of that starts with, what we do internally within our workforce. At JPMorgan, we've got a new head of diversity and inclusion who is wonderful, who is really pushing us in new ways. And we're doing a lot to think about how we can continue to expand diversity within our group and our team. I actually should say that my team is all women. So that's great, but we need, to get more men and people of color involved, and that's something that's going to be a big priority for us going forward.
Great, thank you. So Michelle, I'll turn to you next, and the question again is if you can share any reflections on your kind of work in this field over the years, where you think it's going, how it can evolve, and any thoughts that you have on engendering greater diversity.
I've been thinking about this a lot. I was in college in the 1990s, please don't do the math. And when I was in college, that's when the Framework Convention on Climate Change was drafted and agreed to. It's when we were beginning to see real progress on the Montreal Protocol, which was, this huge international groundbreaking agreement to eliminate the chemicals that cause the hole in the ozone layer, and all of these just amazing environmental agreements. So that's why I went into this field. And I joined an environmental NGO right out of college. And I immediately became so frustrated because the environmental issues were relegated to the side and no one really wanted to talk about. And if you wanted to manage environmental issues, you had to be in the room when energy conversations or decisions were being made, when economic decisions were being made, when geopolitical decisions were being made. So I had to pivot my career. And I then spent time working on energy regulatory issues. And I went on energy commodity desk on Wall Street. And I spent a lot of time doing energy, which is amazing. And then I would say about 8 years ago, the issue area, the sector of environment then kind of started rising on the agenda in its own right. And it had its own decisions being made about it and its own boardrooms, if you will. And so then you had, while they would incorporate economic and engineering and science and policy and marketing and everything else, these were, at its core in environmental decisions. And slowly over time, and you see it growing every year that passes, it's gone from being a really soft issue to, I would say, like a really hard issue. And I don't mean hard in terms of the complexities, which it does have, but just being taken seriously, that there is finance behind it and there's real regulatory concerns and opportunities. It's just really big decisions that are being made with an environmental lens. I think we've also seen huge institutional changes. I go back to the NGO that I worked for, and we were trying to convince, at the time, which we didn't think was a great actor on the environment, the World Bank. And the World Bank wasn't taking environment into its regulations, and it wasn't giving impacted people a chance to air their grievances on big projects, infrastructure projects that impacted them. And then you see how that kind of institution has shifted over time, right? And the World Bank is now kind of leading the charge, and almost every single investment it makes is an investment done under a green finance lens. And so that has caused such enormous new opportunities for careers in sustainability, because institutions have shifted so much that it's now such a huge part of its mandate. And then, of course, there's the workforce diversity piece. And, you know, when I started out, particularly when I made that shift to energy, I was frankly the only woman in the room, and I was probably 20 years junior than almost anyone else. So I have to take a deep breath when I'd enter a conference room and get used to a lot of comments about, you know, great secretary, great assistant, intern, you remind me of my granddaughter, all of that. And it's been so amazing to see the change of just how many just incredible and successful and effective and inspiring women colleagues and peers I now have. And I would say on the Microsoft team, I mean, I haven't done all the full math, but women are as much a part of as men, demonstrated and represented on the energy team and the sustainability team, if not outnumber them. And I think where we really need to focus our effort now is making sure that it's not just the gender representation, but it's the racial and the ethnic representation, that we have, you know, workforce and ecosystem and suppliers that represent our communities and that look like our communities. And so doing much more outreach and inclusion of you know, of so many other minorities, to make sure that we really fully are tapping our potential, and not just with our own companies, but also our suppliers. You know, and Microsoft has really started the hard work of doing this. We have a long way to go, but we look forward to partnering with all of you on it.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, Raminta, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I agree with you, Verena, in terms of where the profession is heading. It's pretty exciting to see all the new people, the new opportunities, and the talent and the passion that they bring. And I'm really looking forward on them contributing significantly to how to really head in the right direction. But I think as a profession, we have to diversify, as everyone's saying, and just want to add a couple things on that. We absolutely have to make it a priority, and a lot of companies are, with offices of diversity and inclusion. But what we really need to do is we need to make sure that people of color actually have positions of influence, not just the entry positions and all that. They really, really need to be at the top of the pyramid, not at the bottom. And I think that we really need to put some effort in that. And our team has been doing a lot of thinking also on environmental justice, as Marisa was talking. And really, how do you incorporate environmental justice into corporate sustainability goals? And not like, let's just give to this organization or that organization. I mean, that's the easy way out. I think the difficult one is really, I mean, I don't have the answer to that yet. How do we incorporate it? But I think what we need to do is start talking in our companies, within our companies first. And I think we have to ask ourselves the hard questions and take an honest look at how our companies have negatively affected communities, and particularly and probably most likely with communities of color. I think that's the first step. Let's really have that conversation. And the second step, let's start talking to those people in those communities. Let's bring them in. Let's hear their stories. Let's hear their opinions, their ideas, and their solutions, and how they think corporations can help. And I think we're going to hear some really creative things there. So we have to just start these conversations, because really in the end, I think all of us know that that's truly what sustainability means, including everyone to the table.
Okay. And thank you, Raminta. And Ezgi, what are your thoughts on kind of how you've seen the field evolve? And I don't know if, and we've had, you know, banking, technology, automotive, and now, you know, agricultural and consumer goods. I'm hearing a common thread across these different sectors. Maybe Ezgi, can you talk about how have you seen your field evolve, and what are your thoughts on what are ways to engender greater diversity?
Yeah, I agree with all my fellow panelists. I do believe that we are the last generation of sustainability leaders that kind of paved their way into the profession, you know, into corporate sustainability. You know, take me, for example, I'm an engineer by training. And, you know, I wouldn't have imagined having an amazing job that I love so much, you know, later in life, and it's incredible. And, you know, there are many incredibly talented emerging leaders out there, right, who are going to school, they're getting the degrees and the certificates to study sustainability and climate change. And I think what they're really equipped with is not just the passion, but also the science and data to bring in the technical expertise, to bring in the proofs of concept, to demonstrate that the sustainability makes business sense, right? That climate change is a topic that businesses need to address. And, you know, I love what Marisa said about us being change agents. I definitely agree. I do feel like we play the role of change agents inside and outside our organizations. And to create that long-lasting change, you know, you need to bring in and embrace diversity of thought, culture, experience. And I think it just comes with the nature of the function of the role. But, you know, similarly, you also need to be able to multi-solve, manage different stakeholders. And the profession used to be that, you know, could you manage NGOs and could you maybe work with local authorities? But now increasingly more so, we need to learn to speak corporate language. We need to, you know, in addition to being fluent in the many languages of civil society, supply chains, customers, local stakeholders, but speaking that corporate language is incredibly important because you need to invoke trust. You need to invoke trust in your stakeholders that you've done your homework, that you've listened to all the parties involved, that you understand what the shared objective is, and you understand how you can influence or how you can be part of that decision making. Again, I think this was a point that Marisa made, and I totally agree. So yeah, so, and if I think about the future of the profession, you know, where are we heading? I think if there is a couple of things that the pandemic has shown us, it's really blurred the lines between environmental, social, and economic sustainability, right? So for us to just look at this from one dimension, that's no longer going to work. We need to really look at it from all three dimensions. We need to be able to multi-solve. But it also taught us that, you know, when the risk is perceived to be real, we can come together and we can unite in ways that we've never done before as people, as businesses, civil society, and governments together. So again, you know, I really want to emphasize that, you know, we have reasons to believe, we have evidence now that we can tackle these problems. And yeah, so the state of the profession, I think, you know, there are a couple of big kind of tailwinds from the pandemic on the profession.
All right, so before I move into our audience questions, which we have a lot of great technical questions, and I know all of you can answer. We have other questions as well. Are there any thoughts that anybody else wants to add to this conversation that they hadn't had a chance to say, or that may have come to mind before we move on? Okay, the one thing I will kind of add is I think, and I mean, Ezgi, I think you touched on it, and I think somebody else touched on it. I think is this not only the need to sort of translate, you know, into different business units and be able to gain trust and speak that language, but the importance of data and the scientific and our technical understanding. And so as we think about, you know, I was trained as a sort of more in the social sciences, and I have found it to be really interesting that throughout my career I've had to really develop a deep technical bench and foray into the scientific and engineering spaces that I was not necessarily expecting. And so I think a multi-dimensional career also requires kind of an ability to learn different things. I will say, I think though that from what I am hearing is that there's a role if you have a strong technical background, if you have a strong data-driven background, if you have strong relationship management skills, that there are positions that can accommodate those. So I think that's sort of what I heard. So I'd like to kind of move over into some of the audience questions, and some of these are a bit technical in nature. So as we sort of go back to thinking about kind of the how in terms of how companies are making reductions in their operations and their supply chains. So the first question is, you know, do we have all of the tools and technology necessary to make these deep decarbonization implementation and investments? Or are we kind of still at the pilot phase or the test phase? I think a lot of stakeholders are unclear about whether or not, to what extent do we need more research and development, or to what extent are we ready to commercialize what's out there, and maybe the barriers aren't technological. So I'll kind of make this a little bit more popcorn style if anybody wants to take that question first.
I can jump in.
Oh, Michelle and then Marisa.
So I'll start. I think it's somewhere in between, is that I think there are a lot of good tools that we have available today that can take us a good chunk of the way there. There's still a lot that still needs to be developed for the stickier pieces. But I think there's a slightly different challenge, which is that the technologies actually might exist, but they're not yet, you know, able to be commercialized, either because the cost is so high. So how do we really bring the cost down of some of these technologies, particularly in the industrial side or in the carbon removal side, so that they can really be much more widely used and then and adopted. So it's not just about the R&D piece. Certainly, there's a bunch more of R&D that we have to do, but there's a lot in the commercialization and deployment side.
Just to underscore exactly what Michelle said, I think she's totally right. The IEA recently came out with a new publication where they noted that approximately 30% of the emission reductions that we're going to need in order to sort of satisfy the sustainable development scenario that they put out as part of their World Energy Outlook, 30% of those reductions are going to have to come from technologies that are not yet commercially available today. So to Michelle's point, it's not like it's not necessarily that they don't exist, but in many cases they need more testing, refinement, and they're not affordable at scale. So I think tackling that challenge is critically important.
Raminta and Ezgi, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo both Marisa and Michelle. You know, I'm going to be very simple and give some examples, and you know, feel free to disagree with me. But if you think about renewables, it's the most developed in terms of development, commercialization, you know, economic viability, right? And then you've got the EV, which is, you know, following right behind, and we're scaling them up around the world, and there's different solutions that we're looking at. And then we're trying to tackle renewable heat as an opportunity, right? Thermal energy that we use in our plants. How do we tackle that? How do we actually decarbonize that? The way we are going about this is, yes, we also believe that there are many technologies and solutions out there. There are many incredible startups out there that are waiting for their solutions to be piloted at scale so that we can see some of those results on the ground, you know, in real life. And you know, when we launched our 2025 sustainability goals back in 2018, we also launched our 100+ sustainability accelerator. And through that accelerator program, we're actually looking at different solutions that we're bringing in to pilot to solve some of the world's greatest challenges that we're facing, that our communities are facing as well. And you know, this is its second year. In the first year, we've got some amazing results, but in the second year, we actually are testing a renewable energy solution now in Africa in one of our breweries to see, you know, is there a solution, is there a viable solution to renewable heat needs? And yes, I mean, I think the only way forward is for us to continue to test, to continue to take a leap of faith, you know, take that interest in piloting something new, something disruptive. Only then we can find out if we're actually able to solve some of these problems.
Raminta, what's your perspective?
Yeah, I agree with everyone, and I think that we also need policy for this and incentives to do these type of things, because really, if you really take a look at how renewable energy took off, it was exactly that. The incentives were high, and then, you know, with the step down thing, I think that we really need incentives for a lot of these innovations to come forward and for people to work on them and to figure out how to commercialize them and all that. So. And I kind of
want to build on that thread a bit. I mean, we do get questions. We have some questions in the chat in the thread. I think that speak to, you know, what is it going to take to really move us into a transition? I know that this is more broad. You know, tech companies, banks have been critiqued for having ties to fossil fuels. Some people might say that vehicle manufacturers aren't moving fast enough in terms of making that transition to EV. And I think, you know, what everybody here has mentioned is the complexity of working in, you know, large organizations. I think, can you talk a little bit about like moving, you know, companies that are huge, that are so big in scale, that have connections and ties to, you know, what will eventually be the old way of doing things. And as you move towards, you know, whether it's buying from, financing, you know, building for a sustainable future, talk a little bit about what are the barriers that need to come down? Like, what are some of the policy, and Raminta, you just talked about policy, what are some of the things that you see need to happen to begin to make that flywheel go faster so that these solutions move from pilot in early stage into deployment? And I'll, again, open it up for whoever wants to speak first.
So I can weigh in. I think it's a journey for all these technologies. I think Raminta's totally right. you need policy, one, you need the right signals, and carbon pricing can be really effective, but I think it should be one tool in the toolbox, because certain sectors or activities actually respond more to other types of signals. You know, in the case of something like renewable energy, for example, the PTC and the ITC have been incredibly helpful. Arguably, if you actually look at the sort of pricing value of the PTC or the ITC, they're far more powerful than something like a carbon price in terms of levels that we're seeing around carbon pricing today. You know, other things like building codes, you know, hugely impactful. So I think figuring out what are the right policy solutions to, you know, address the right challenge. I often come back to that a lot. There are a lot of solutions out there, but how do you find the right solution for the problem you're trying to solve? And that's really important. And, you know, in my view, I think, you know, for most companies, cost is going to be the #1 thing that brings us to scalability. You know, we're all doing what we're doing now because, you know, a lot of solutions make sense. And we're also trying to go above and beyond and do the right thing. But a lot of these things are not necessarily, you know, cost effective right now. We're doing them because they're the right thing. But I think in order to get greater widespread adoption, thinking about policy as a way to drive price signals in the right direction is going to be critically important.
Thank you, Marisa. Does anyone else want to say anything before we move on to the next question?
Sure, this is Michelle. I can just jump in. I mean, the last question we talked about research and development. I think when you think of the various policy buckets that are up there to reach the different use cases or problems that Marisa alluded to, you have, you know, technologies that actually exist and are close to commercial, but maybe for other reasons can't compete in the market. I mean, this past week or 2 weeks ago, there was a really groundbreaking rule that was passed in the United States, at least for wholesale markets by FERC, which is going to allow distributed energy resources. So think storage, solar panels, electric vehicle aggregation, anything that exists on the consumer side of the grid to be able to participate in markets. So to be able to both hold and then sell electricity, to be able to store it, to do frequency regulations, all different types of services that are provided in wholesale markets. And that, you know, that didn't exist a few weeks ago, and something that many stakeholders have been working on for several years. Obviously, we need that at the retail level still, and we need a lot of rules and tariffs that are going to be, you know, that are going to allow it to actually take place. But still, the fact, those are the types of obstacles. We need market mechanisms. It could be a price on carbon, but other things that accurately reflect what this externality is, that there is a cost to putting carbon in the atmosphere, and how do we then plan for it and change our behavior. And we need transparency. We need better data. We need to be able to allow customers to make more improved choices by understanding the carbon that goes into things. Investors as well. I mean, the same thing that all of our companies are doing about the carbon that is in our supply chain, or, you know, in our operations, we need to allow others to be able to have that data so that they can make more informed decisions. So I think all of those types of policies will really get us to, you know, to a faster transition, and a transition that we're all hoping for and working for.
Excellent. So I've got a question more for Raminta and Ezgi, and then I've got another one coming from related to sort of nature-based solutions for everybody to weigh in on. So for both Raminta and Ezgi, you know, one of the things that, and I guess, you know, I hear this from marketers, you know, people care so much about what they put in their bodies, on their bodies, and around their bodies. And I think when we think about, you know, beer, and we think about getting into our car, you know, these are things that, you know, are part of our everyday life, and what we consume and how we get around. What has been the response, both internally as well as externally, to some of the efforts that you've done? So Ezgi, I think about, you know, some of the work that you're doing with your supply chains. We all remember the Super Bowl video that Anheuser-Busch had, which I thought was fabulous. And Raminta, you know, for as Honda forays more into developing zero-emission vehicles, you know, what are you finding resonates with customers? You know, what is the response internally? So maybe I'll start with Ezgi and then go to Raminta, but talk a little bit about like how you're making changes in your products that people can tangibly touch, and what the internal and external response has been.
Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, I believe the name of the Super Bowl spot was "Win Never Felt Better," and man, you can count on our brilliant marketeers to tell an epic story. I really think I can take a lesson from them and how we can continue to promote and champion our sustainability strategy. But you know, it's I think that's the next big wave, right? I think, you know, we talked about how we moved from corporate philanthropy, CSR, to kind of core corporate sustainability, where we are integrating into business decisions, where we are learning to speak the corporate language and making sure that, you know, every program we create makes business sense and continues to build that community and value chain resilience. And I think, you know, we work really well to learn how to partner with the operational side of the business. And I think the next big wave is to also partner with the commercial side of the business. And you know, we're doing that through some of our brands. Started with our Stella Artois brand 5 years ago when they partnered with water.org, which was more of a cause marketing initiative to provide you know, water access to women in need around the world through, you know, a purchase of a chalice. And then more recently, you know, 2 years ago, when we launched our Budweiser 100% renewable symbol in every market, we are going 100% renewables. And you know, the unique insight there that our marketing team has found is that oftentimes, our consumers, an everyday person, finds climate change and the climate crisis to be an incredibly complex topic, and the narrative remains very unempowering. So the unique insight in our Budweiser efforts is that, you know, we want to enable and empower our consumers to make an everyday smart decision, to say, you know, when they look at that packaging, when they're standing in front of a shelf, to say, okay, this beer was brewed with 100% renewable electricity. It's that everyday smart decision that they can feel empowered about. And you know, that for me is the simplicity of the messaging there, and how you're trying to empower people and trying to provide solutions for them that they can be part of, I think is what we're going to see more of, right? So moving from kind of some of the more cause marketing initiatives into more purpose-driven initiatives that are backed by corporate efforts as well.
Thank you. Raminta, what's been your take?
Well, I'd like to talk a little bit specifically about electric vehicles, because I feel like the position of electric vehicles shouldn't even be that it's an environmental vehicle. I mean, I personally grew up driving sports cars, so I love driving fast. And if you ever have driven an electric vehicle, there's no comparison. They're so fast and they're so great. They handle so well. And then they're so quiet. There's so many things about it that I think once you drive an electric vehicle, it's really difficult to drive something else. So I think we really need to focus on getting consumers in there, getting them to understand what the value is. I mean, the other great thing is not going to a gas station, to just coming home and plugging in your vehicle, which it's all these small things that you don't really realize until you actually drive the vehicle and really check it out. For example, my husband drives the electric vehicle now. I have a hard time getting that out of his hands, and he never wants it. He doesn't even want a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. It's just pure electric for him. So from a consumer perspective, I think that's something we need to look at.
So what I'd like to do is kind of also ask the question around nature-based solutions. So as companies really move towards aggressive greenhouse gas reductions in their future, there I think is a recognition that there is going to need to be carbon removals, whether those are engineered removals, and I think this speaks to some of the more technical and engineering challenges that we're facing around whether these technologies are commercially ready and deployable at a cost-effective rate. And there's also the world of nature-based solutions. And Michelle, I'm going to start with you here, because I think Microsoft, you know, with its really ambitious goals, and I know Microsoft has done a lot of work kind of in this space. I think some of the questions that are coming in are around, you know, what are some of the, I guess, both challenges and opportunities with nature-based solutions, and where is there a need to kind of strengthen them? I think for those, one thing that I find in the sustainability field is there's a sort of the broad framing of an issue, and then you dive really into the technical pretty quickly and get in the weeds. So if we can kind of maybe stay for a lay non-technical audience that might be listening in, Michelle, maybe you can kind of lead us in this conversation around what is Microsoft's perspective around using nature-based solutions, and where might there be some, you know, opportunities for improvement going forward in that space? And Ezgi, I'll be looking at you as well for an answer here.
Sure. And let me just start by framing. I mean, nature-based solutions, obviously, we're really talking about the carbon that is sequestered from, from forestation, reforestation, from different agricultural practices. So that's what we're meaning by nature-based solutions. So the actual sequestration and capture of carbon rather than avoided. And it's a subset of carbon removal, which is literally removing carbon from the air. We all know that we're probably not going to be able to hit exactly absolute zero, and that we are going to need carbon removal in order to be able to get to the kind of balanced net zero that we need to avoid the worst scenarios of climate change by mid-century. And so for Microsoft, our carbon removal strategy is going to involve both nature-based solutions and engineered solutions. We actually just a few months ago issued our first RFP, request for proposals, for about 1 million metric tons of carbon removal. And so that is informing a lot about what the market looks like and what are some of these challenges. So I think that we'll be able to have a much more informed conversation in the near future about the acute challenges. But I think more broadly speaking, it's like, look, how do you verify it? How do you know that it is actually being sequestered, and where is it being sequestered? I think that is a huge challenge, and that's going to be about monitoring and verification, but also standards and making sure we're all working off the same type of page when it comes to what's required and what counts. And I think what's really exciting to me about this space is that you think about, even just looking at the United States, how many areas, how many communities can be able to participate in this type of economic activity, because that is what it is. You can be paying forest owners and paying landowners to be able to do something with their land other than keep it or harvest it. And it gives them just another option. And so how do we create more robust markets for these, and marketplaces for these owners of forests and farmland to be able to tap these markets and to be able to do it in a way where they know it complies with the types of standards and verification and monitoring requirements that we're going to need to be able to use these and count these as credible. Back to you.
Thank you. Ezgi, what are your thoughts, given that Anheuser-Busch, agricultural company, you're working with
that's right. Yeah, so maybe I can offer a slightly different perspective, looking at it from a different angle. I definitely agree with Michelle, right? I think the biggest challenge here is quantification, verification. This is definitely very complex, and I think the frameworks need to become more robust and more standardized. But the way we think about this is, in our supply chains, and we have agricultural development programs in 13 countries around the world, and we are looking at and working with our farmers to practice a number of different kind of crop management styles. We're looking at regenerative agriculture, we're looking at conservation agriculture, we're trying to make them more climate resilient. We're trying to bring in more field level data and coupling it with climate data so that we can foresee what's going to happen to our barley sourcing regions, because barley is a very niche crop. So we took it up on ourselves to think about how we can continue to grow locally in many markets. And I think at the bottom of it all, we have to just think of it as good agricultural practices, right? And I think we cannot separate these two. We can go ahead and pay landowners and count the carbon emission reduction from their practices, but you can't do that if you're not really instilling this culture of you need to be mindful and resourceful of your soil health and your water and how you treat the land and where your runoff goes. So I think it has to be a very multi-dimensional approach that we need to take if we're going to make this work and if it's going to scale around the world.
Thank you. Marisa, did you want to add something?
Yeah, just a couple things. I really agree with everything that's been said. I think there's the only way that we're going to reach net zero is by having nature-based solutions part of our toolkit. And I think there's long been recognition that so many nature-based solutions provide not only carbon benefits but broader social and economic and, other health benefits, for communities and for the environment as well. So we've been really proud over the years to be a big supporter of NatureVest, which is the Nature Conservancy's impact investing unit focused on conservation and conservation finance. So many other NGOs are doing some really exciting work in this space, and glad to see, more companies, whether it's Anheuser-Busch and Microsoft and others, really thinking about how they can leverage so much of this in their core business practices. It's really exciting, and I think there's a ton of potential here ahead.
Excellent. Raminta, did you want to add anything before we go into our last round?
Well, I have nothing additional to add, but I really appreciate what everybody said, and now I'm getting lots of ideas, so thank you.
So I think we have about 4 minutes left, so I'd like to give everybody a minute or so to kind of say some closing remarks. Is there anything, based on our conversation today, where we've kind of covered, what are the challenges and opportunities that your companies face? What are the different leadership qualities, and I've really appreciated some of the advice that you've all laid out for people who might be looking to go into this field. Kind of moving ahead, just as you could sort of synthesize, over the next, 12 to 18 months, what are some of, whether it's on the policy front or the market-based, consumer preferences front, what is sort of 1 or 2 areas that you think will really be an area that corporations will be looking at as they either collectively move towards their goals in working with each other or individually? So again, the question is, if you can name 1 or 2, sort of whether it's a trend or it's a particular focal area that you see that companies will be focused on. Why don't we do, we'll end with Marisa. So I don't know if Ezgi, if you're comfortable, we can go Ezgi.
Yeah, sure, I'll go.
All right, thank you.
So, we've always said that the future is local, but I think with the pandemic, it's become so much more clear that we have to continue to invest in local communities, local supply chains, local technologies, local, environments that provide that enabling, policies. So for me, I think over the next 12 to 18 months, we will see that huge focus on local, whether it's from the business perspective, the government, or our own value chain and our communities. So I would leave it at that. The future is local.
Thank you. Michelle, what are your thoughts on the next 12 to 18 months?
So I think that coming back to our conversation about diversity, but particularly environmental justice, and figuring out a way that, or not figuring out a way, but doing the hard work to really to develop and execute solutions that integrate obviously our climate goals and our climate strategies, but also the environmental justice piece of it, the equity piece, and all of the health concerns that have also been brought to the forefront during COVID. And one thing that we're going to be working on at Microsoft is we just announced this partnership with Soul Systems, which is a 500 megawatt portfolio of new renewable projects across the United States that we are going to do invest in minority-owned and women-owned businesses to be able to provide the new projects to help us reach our renewable energy goal. And also, we're going to be investing at least $50 million of the proceeds from those projects into those local communities for green skilling, for environmental remediation work, and really helping those communities with their environmental and climate strategies. So I think that's going to be front of mind for us, and I think it's going to be front of mind for a lot of other companies and organizations.
Great, thank you. And Raminta, and then Marisa.
I'm going to pretty much second what Michelle said. I think that there's going to be a continued investment in renewable energy, and how do we extend that to suppliers and, in our case, dealers. And then also, really, we need to have those hard conversations about environmental justice and how do we approach that.
Thank you. Marisa, what are your thoughts?
So this is where I wish I had a crystal ball, but I think at the end of the day, so much of our focus is going to be around how we continue to make progress towards Paris, and what more we can do to move the policy landscape and think about technology. So it is going to take a village to do all of this. So I think there's going to be a lot more collaboration and partnership, which is exciting and great, and lots of opportunity for us all to work together to really make a difference on this issue.
Thank you. I want to thank our 4 panelists, Marisa Buchanan, Ezgi Barcenas, Raminta Jautokas, and Michelle Patron for joining us today. This webinar will be available on the C2ES website, and thank you so much for all of your insights today. I learned a lot and really appreciate your time joining us for Climate Week. So with that, we'll go ahead and end the webinar. Thank you.